The New York Rangers have obviously been quite disappointing so far this regular season as they currently sit at the very bottom of the Metropolitan Division, but I figured in today's video, instead of talking about how bad things have been for the Rangers as of late, we would take a look and kind of talk about some of the young players on this NHL roster for the New York Rangers right now. Guys like, Braden Schneider, Noah Laba, for example, those kind of players, and, just talk about each and every one of those young guys who have cracked a full-time NHL role with the team right now throughout this season. And we're going to discuss kind of, what their potential may be, how their season's kind of gone, and just talk about the young players on the NHL lineup for the Rangers right now that have cracked a pretty much kind of full-time role. We're not going to focus on prospects like a Scott Morrow or a, Gabe Perreault or a Brendan Hoffman or a Brett Berard. Not those kind of prospects who haven't really quite, cracked a full-time role. We're talking about the guys, who have earned a full-time job with this Rangers team so far this season, and just going to kind of talk about how good their season's been and just kind of talk about them in general, as they are obviously the future of this team. The Rangers do have a bit of an aging core of players. Obviously, you've got guys like Panarin, who we'll see what happens there, but I feel like he's more than likely gone than going to stay. You've got a guy like JT Miller, Mika Zibanejad, Vincent Trocheck. Adam Fox isn't the spring chicken he used to be, of course. You got a guy like Gavrikov you brought in there. He's not necessarily young, so there are some definite kind of, guys in their later 20s, early 30s who, aren't going to be around forever. So let's kind of take a look more so at the young players on this NHL team right now. And we're going to start off with, of course, Noah Laba, who I absolutely think is going to potentially one day be a really good second-line center. I think that's his kind of potential there, his ceiling, and I think he could end up fitting that role quite well one day. Obviously, I think the big question whether or not he's going to be able to become that true second-line kind of top six caliber centerman is the offensive game, which I think this season has been pretty solid. I think he's had a good overall season there. He's had a good defensive impact, I think, for the most part there. Not a bad face-off taker. I think a solid kind of two-way centerman, though, can play a bit kind of physical there. I mean, isn't quite as physical as guys like, Will Coolie or like a Braden Schneider or Rempe, for example, of course, but he's definitely not some kind of small weakling out there. He can lay the body a bit, be a fairly physical guy, and I'm sure, you have to remember, he is a rookie, of course, right now as well, so I'm sure as the years go on, the seasons go on, he gets some more games under his belt at the pro level, because he barely got a chance to play pro hockey at the end of last season there once his college season ended, and then he made the jump right away this season into the NHL, so I think he's someone with a lot of potential there. I don't quite think he has that kind of true top-line upside. I don't think he's quite at that level, but I think he could definitely be a really good kind of, Vincent Trocheck level centerman, a kind of guy who isn't necessarily a true number one center. You probably want to have him as your number two, but he can fit that role quite well and be, an above average kind of second-line caliber centerman. I think he's got some of his kind of same style of play there. I mean, he's a solid two-way guy, of course, good offensively, I think Noah Laba doesn't quite maybe have that bite as of yet in his game, but if he can develop some of that as well and get the offense really going to upwards of, 55, 60 points plus, upwards of that, I think he can definitely be a really solid, two-way second-line center who, has some good size there, can kill penalties, be a power play guy on PP2, and just be an all-around kind of really solid centerman, and those players are definitely very valuable to have. And next up here, I'm going to lump in together Will Coolie and Alexis Lafreniere because I think they're both obviously, not the same kind of style of player, but I think they're both at about the same level. I think they're both kind of, top six caliber wingers. Obviously, a guy like Lafreniere has experience playing left and on the right side. Coolie's more of a lefty for sure, but obviously they're both, solid wingers, I think capable of being in the top six. Right now, this season, the offensive numbers haven't been too incredible for either of them. They haven't been completely terrible, but they're obviously not too amazing. So it's definitely something that you hope will come up as the season goes along there. And if not, you hope it comes up, next season, because we saw a guy like, of course, Lafreniere had that big breakout season back in 2023-24. So not last season, but the one before that. And then Will Coolie had his big breakout this past season in 2024-25. So Hopefully, we can kind of see those players get back to that level and maybe even above that possibly. But I think both of them are, top 6 caliber guys. Of course, Will Coolie, you're going to get a bit more of a kind of well-rounded game, maybe a bit kind of less high-end offensive level there compared to a guy like Lafreniere. When they're clicking on all cylinders, I think Lafreniere is a, very lethal offensive weapon, to whereas a guy like Will Coolie, I think when he's clicking on all cylinders, he's a lot more of a kind of good, well-rounded player. He can be a penalty-killing winger, of course. He brings a lot of toughness, physicality. He can scrap after whistles, make some big hits, of course, is hitting a lot, obviously, and also is going to just bring a reliable defensive game, and he can definitely bring some good offense, especially in and around the net as well, battling around the net there. I think he is quite good and has some of that kind of Kreider stuff in him, but obviously not at that same kind of level. But hopefully, as he does continue to develop, he, gets a little better at that as well. And hopefully can be the kind of, at least close to the level of Tipper and, just kind of, player around the net like Kreider was, because he, of course, for the Rangers was a very lethal player, deadly guy around the net there, whacking away at rebounds, tipping in pucks, anything around the net there. Kreider did, at a pretty good level offensively for the most part. He just kind of played around the net quite well. So hopefully Coolie can kind of develop more of that in his game. But I think they're both, like I said, top 6 caliber wingers there. I think they definitely can have their kind of down moments and go quiet on games on end. But if they can get back on track here, I think they are definitely, 50, 60 kind of point caliber guys. And maybe, guy like Lafreniere ends up figuring things out in a year or two and he ends up being a 70, 80 point guy maybe, because I really do think he has that kind of potential. But with Lafreniere especially, it's about becoming a more consistent player, because he can, have a game where he looks absolutely amazing. He takes over the entire game. He's the best player on either team on the night, and he puts up 3-4 points. But the next, week or so, it goes along and he plays 3 or 4 games and he has no points and doesn't show up at all. So that's kind of the problem with Lafreniere. But if he can become a little more of a consistent player, I definitely think he can be a very deadly player going forward for this Rangers team. Next up here, we've got Adam Edstrom and Matt Rempe, who I think, for the most part are going to be, mostly fourth liners. Maybe a guy like Edstrom figures out things offensively enough to get into a third line role at some point throughout his career. But I think for the most part, these are definitely 2 fourth line forwards who can be really key players, though. I mean, having good quality fourth line players that are cheap are very important. And obviously, at some point, they're going to start making more money. But for right now, when you have guys like Edstrom and Rempe, and obviously, Rempe right now isn't in the lineup, and Edstrom hasn't been maybe as impactful as he was earlier on in the season. But I think when, that Edstrom, Carrick, and Rempe line is clicking, they really are a force out there. I mean, they're bringing a lot of toughness, physicality, energy, and life to the team, which I think, this team really is lacking right now. And obviously, sometimes the record doesn't say it is as important, but I think when you have a guy like Rempe in your lineup, he can really bring a lot of life to your team. And obviously right now, this is a team that, you got your captain taking shifts off there. The team just seems kind of dead out there at moments. They're not giving much. They're not playing with a ton of effort. They're not being physical. They're just not giving enough out there, enough effort on the ice. And I think when you have a guy like Rempe out there, yeah, he's not going to be a guy who takes over a game and is kind of leading by example out there by, producing a bunch of points or doing something crazy like that. But he's someone who can go out there and you're down 2-0 in a game and he just absolutely rocks the star of the other team there, and you're back in the game maybe or something like that, or he goes out there and rocks some fourth line guy or fights some guy, whoever it is, whatever happens, and he can just kind of make a fight or a hit or whatever it is, and it just kind of gets the whole entire vibe and energy and life back into the team there. So I think that's something that guys like Rempe, Carrick, and Edstrom in a fourth line role, they may be fourth liners, but they definitely still can have a big impact on this team. And I think going forward, having a guy like Rempe, especially in that kind of a role, is very, very important for a team that constantly just seems to have lots of players just kind of, not play with a lot of energy, not play with a lot of life. So having a guy like that who can just bring so much to the team in that sense, I do think is really important and a bit underrated at moments as well. And next up here quickly with a guy like Juuso Parssinen before we move on to the defensemen. I think he's definitely just more of a kind of fourth line guy. I think he's got, a decent bit of skill there offensively at moments, can definitely show some of that, and, does play with a lot of energy and physicality at moments. But I think realistically, he is definitely just more of a kind of fourth line player. He can play center or wing, which is nice, but I really don't think you want to have him in a top 9 role. I think he definitely fits the fourth line or kind of being a healthy scratch a little more, but having him as a depth option is definitely not a bad thing at all. And now for the defenseman, of course, we've got here to start off Braden Schneider, who I think on his best day is definitely a second pairing caliber defenseman. I think he's a good, solid, reliable, of course, more defensive, pretty physical player. He definitely this season is being quite physical, though, laying out a lot of hits, a lot of checks, which is nice. This team, of course, is really lacking that, especially with a guy like Matt Rempe out and a guy like, of course, JT Miller not quite bringing it, physically or just really at all in any area of his game right now. But I think, obviously, Schneider, he's a solid second pairing caliber defenseman. Right now is definitely being kind of blocked by Adam Fox, of course, and the emergence of a guy like Will Borgen, who now is unfortunately going to be missing quite a bit of time, it seems like, with an injury, but he has definitely taken a massive step this season, looking like a true top 4 caliber guy, and I think Schneider definitely can be that as well, but Borgen just been better this season, so that's kind of why Schneider is in that third pairing role, but he is a second pairing caliber guy. I think he's definitely got some pretty good trade value right now as well. If the Rangers decided to make a move, I do think that wouldn't be the absolute kind of worst idea. I know, lots of fans want to keep him in the lineup there and would rather see him around with this team, and I would as well, but I understand this team definitely has some pretty big needs elsewhere, on the left side of the defense core going forward after this season with Susie, being an expiring contract, and, you probably don't want to have him long-term in that second pairing role, of course. There's definitely some questions on that side of things, and then on the forward side of things, adding another kind of nice younger winger would definitely not be a bad idea at all, especially if a guy like, Panarin is going to go. So I think there are definitely some needs elsewhere, but a guy like Schneider is nice to have in a third pairing role, although I do think he is more suited to be in a second pairing role, obviously for his sake, but I do think he's a solid all-around defenseman, but of course definitely more of a defensive guy who does play a pretty good shutdown game at moments. And next up here, we've got Matthew Robertson, who I think has been a really pleasant surprise this season for the Rangers. He, of course, has spent like the last kind of 4 full seasons pretty much down there in the AHL, playing with the Hartford Wolfpack, just being a good solid defenseman, and this year he has finally gotten the opportunity at the NHL level to really see what he can do. He got a few games at the end of last season, of course, didn't get a whole lot of an opportunity, but this year, or this season around, he's gotten a whole lot bigger of a look where he's, been in a top 4 role at moments. He's, mostly, of course, been in a third pairing kind of number 6/7 role, but I think it's been a good quality, more than serviceable defenseman in a third pairing role, and I think going forward, having a guy in his mid-20s who's, got some good size there to build like 6'3", 6'4". He's pretty big, can move the puck fairly well, solid defensively, pretty reliable. I mean, I think that's a decent guy to have around your team. So I think Robertson's been really good and definitely a lot better than I expected. I'm not saying he's been some top 4 caliber guy, game in and game out, but he showed flashes of being able to kind of withstand the role of a top 4 caliber defenseman. And I just think with what he's been asked to do and with where he's kind of been at in previous seasons, being a kind of AHLer, I think he really did step up in a big way for this team. And especially when Susie was out earlier on this season, I think definitely played a pretty big and good role for this Rangers team. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post a video about the New York Rangers every single day at 10 a.m. Eastern time. And also, definitely don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on today's video and, what are your thoughts on the New York Rangers as a whole right now, but also, what are your thoughts on these young players on the New York Rangers right now? Which ones do you want to see around here long term? Are there any of them that you want to see kind of traded away? Let me know your thoughts on these young New York Rangers players at the NHL level currently. I'll catch you next one, and bye.